think it tells us that the colonial ideology, while it was centered in the colonial racial empires of Europe, it also became what I would call the grammar of the world, in a way that everyone that came after it took on aspects of that ideology, because the ideology would tell us that if you want to belong to the future, you have to be modern. If you want to be modern, you have to be Western. And unfortunately, many people outside the West thought this is something that they can do. But to Westernize what was considered to be non-Western required a degree of violence that meant that you had to make those societies Western. But you had to accept the Western definitions of what a Western society is. So I think what it tells us is that the colonial racial project of Europe was not just restricted to the colonies, but it was a global project. The problem with the national education program is that national education is basically tied into the idea of the nation state. The nation state is paradoxical. On the one hand, the nation state in many countries is the achievement of the national liberation movements. On the other hand, the nation state is actually a rejection of the possibility of other kinds of political communities which existed before. So the nation state reproduces the racism and the colonialism of the European empires. I wouldn't say necessarily artificial boundaries, but it creates boundaries where there were no boundaries. And it makes cases that these nations are the primary sense of belonging. So it's more interested in building support for the nation than actually educating the people in what may be useful for them in this world. Problem isn't what can be done. The main problem is who will do it. I think we can all agree on the recipe of how to be decolonial. What we can't agree is who's going to do the cooking. And that is the real task. So when you have lots of recipes and no cooks, you will have no food. You just have recipes. And I think the challenge that we face is not that we don't have recipes, is we don't have people willing to cook or people able to cook. So maybe we need to train the cooks for them to read the recipes so that we can have food. I think there are two elements to language. One is a language that we basically use in terms of communicating across time. So, for example, the ability to read things that may have been written 200 years ago, 150 years ago, 175 years ago, etc. So this is a way of connecting. And one of the things that education does and language allows is that grandchildren can talk to their grandparents about some of these national texts because they don't change. The difficulty, of course, comes if there's a rupture, which means that you cannot read beyond a certain age, not because you don't know how to read, is that you don't know how to read the script, for example. So I think there's one element of language which is just natural language, but there's another element of language which I would call a conceptual vocabulary. And that is the concepts that we use to understand the world. And those concepts themselves have a particular kind of circulation. And if we don't interrogate those concepts, we take those concepts to be something just to be applied automatically, we will not be able to do anything creative. And in that sense, I would say that it leads to a huge problem, because it's not just that we don't have a language of our own, it's that we don't have a conceptual vocabulary that understands the world around us.